Enter now the age of apocalypse, sugar, with your hosts, Dayspring and Scott Free.
Xavier is dead.
Apocalypse reigns.
This is the age of apocalypse. Oh my gosh, Ian, it is so wonderful to have you on the podcast.
Happy to be here.
Man, I remember when the Morrison era was kicking off and you were on Uncanny, and it was such a vibe. It was such a vibe.
It was great fun to be there at the time, from what I remember of it. It was a long time ago now. I mean, it's 22 years ago, something like that.
It's been 22 years.
Yeah, pretty sure it was around 2000, 2001, something like that.
Yeah. Well, that era of comics, I think why it's so special is because I grew up on the comics, and I read them religiously up until probably Zero Tolerance, around there. And then I ended up leaving, but I came back during that Morrison era. And I was reading Morrison, and then I read Uncanny, and your art, I was like, I think this is the same guy who did Cable number 20 or
yeah.
And I was just like, I just loved, I mean, that time I just loved so much because it was like a reintroduction to the books.
Okay. Yeah, no, it was a good time, and it was a completely different take what Grant and Frank were doing on the X-Men.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, it's good fun. Yeah.
So I want to dive deep into your comic book history here and have our listeners get a chance to get to know you.
Okay.
What was the first comic book you ever picked up?
That would have probably been either The Mighty World of Marvel, which was a British reprint of the American stuff from the 60s, or it would have been a Super Spider-Man issue, which again was a reprint, or it would have been Captain Britain, which was original stories written by Chris Claremont and drawn by Herb Trimpe and inked by Fred Keder. So that it would be one of those three probably. It was with the first comic that I picked up. The first sort of like superhero inspired book or graphic novel-ish type thing would have been a Marvel Man annual when I was probably about 5 or 6. My gran picked it up at a jumble sale, which I suppose is like a yard sale in America, isn't it?
Yeah, no, that is.
Yeah. And that was my first introduction to superheroes and comics in general. And I remember just liking the really bright colors and the powers, especially flying at the time. Yeah. So that would have been probably one of the first comics I picked up. Would have been one of those three.
You know, it's really interesting when I talk to people who are not newer comic book fans. We grew up having to go to garage sales. What did you call them? Jumbo sales?
Jumble. Jumble.
Jumble sales.
That's what it's called over here, 'cause it's like jumbles of stuff, you know. Yeah.
And that's how you discovered these superheroes and these comic books. And in my case, my cousin gave me one of the Fleer Ultra trading cards. Mm-hmm. But, you know, modern readers, they get to go on the internet or they watch a movie and they discover everything about the characters. But we literally we were of a time that we had to go to a garage sale, a jumble sale, and pick up something. And that curiosity is sort of what entices you to keep going forward with it.
No, totally. There's lots of different ways into comics, but that just happened to be my way in. And then, like I say, the reprints you could get pretty easily in the local newsagent. So I sort of like had my weekly comic book fix because they came out weekly rather than monthly. And in the reprints, it was a selection of different Marvel stories and characters. So it would be like maybe 5 pages of the Fantastic Four, 5 pages of Spider-Man, what have you. And you just, have that every week drip fed to you. So it was a great way to grow up. When I was a kid, there was no other access to superheroes. I mean, there was a handful of television shows, but not many. I think there was the Incredible Hulk and Wonder Woman was on TV when I was a kid. But, and Superman came out in 78. But aside from that, there was no other access to superheroes. So the only way you could get to them was through comic books. And I love superheroes. So that's really what got me into comics.
Do you have a specific memory from Marvel that happened early on in your fandom?
Yeah, it would have been the X-Men when Byrne and Claremont were on it, and I think it was the 2-part Murder World. Was it Murder World? Well, it was during the Murder World bit, I think.
Yeah.
The White Queen. It was one of around that sort of like run.
Yeah.
When Arcade was in it, and the White Queen and the Hellfire Club, I was struggling to find the issues every month, and because at that point I was going to the local newsagent and trying to sort of like root around on the floor with all the comics and try and find them. And I remember trying a different newsagent and finally finding the one that I was after. And that was after that. I went to a comic convention in London and got talking to this guy that did like a mail order service. So from that point on, I knew I wasn't going to miss any issues, because I put like a rolling subscription on the X-Men so that they would come to me without fail.
I love, though, that you were searching for the Dark Phoenix saga and Murder World stories.
I'm that old, yeah.
No, I'm not too far behind. To be very clear, I'm not too far behind. But what was it like reading those stories as they were happening, and now seeing how iconic they are? And like Dark Phoenix saga, for example, that is like the gold standard for an X-Men story. And you were able to hunt out and get those comics. Like, what was the vibe? Was it just...
It was terrific. It was excruciating and frustrating that you had to wait a whole month before you could read the next bit. But I was loving it. I love John Byrne's artwork. I love Chris Claremont's writing. I just loved every bit about it. And it's happy days, happy memories thinking back to then, rooting around, hunting down the issues until I finally found a way of getting them. I recently got the IDW book, which has got the collected, the John Byrne and Chris Claremont stories. Fantastic. So it's like full-size original artwork reproductions of that whole, sort of like selection of comics. It's fantastic. So just when you open the cover up, you're just like, he drew that, and you can see the brush strokes and it's just, and the pencil lines going over the edges, and it's just, it's astonishing just to look at it.
Is that where the seeds were planted for you wanting to become an artist, seeing like John Byrne's art and just having such an appreciation and it resonating with you?
That was one of them, yeah. I think the first time I can remember seeing an artist's work and thinking that's what I'd like to do was probably John Romita Sr. did a run on Captain America in the early 70s, and that was reprinted in the British weeklies that I was just telling you about. Mm-hmm. And I remember there was a page, it was during the storyline with the Grey Gargoyle.
Oh, yeah.
I had the Falcon and Captain America against the Grey Gargoyle. And there was a page where Steve was on a motorcycle. And I always loved motorcycles when I was a kid, and I still do now. And Steve was on the motorcycle and he was riding it down the alleyway, and there were some construction workers doing something on the ground, and he had to avoid it at high speed. So he did some sort of flip on the bike and rode along the side of the wall and then came back down again. Yeah. And I thought that was just the best thing I'd ever seen ever. And it dawned on me that someone drew this, because up until then, I just saw everything in my head like it was a movie or a TV show. And even though I knew I was reading it and looking at it, it stayed with me like I'd been watching a show. But it was around that time, I would have probably been about 7. It just suddenly occurred to me that someone wrote and drew it. rather than it just magically appearing. And I thought, I want to do that. And then I realized that John Romita Sr. drew Spider-Man a lot. So I started, and they'd been in the weeklies as well, but it was just, the penny had dropped, and I could recognize his style on Spider-Man as well as this Captain America story that I'd been reading. And then that's when I knew what I wanted to do, and I wanted to work for Marvel. And then obviously when Byrne started joining the X-Men, I was just blown away. I've always loved his stuff. I kind of gravitate towards what I consider pretty art, and Byrne's stuff is very pretty to look at. So the comparison I would put, if you put Byrne next to Miller, I would prefer Byrne because it's prettier to look at. Miller's stuff is very visceral and very well executed storytelling wise, as is Byrne's. But Byrne's is just prettier to look at from my perspective.
Yeah.
That's just a comparison.
No, and knowing your art and knowing that Byrne was one of those early inspirations for you, I totally see the influence there in you, in very strong, beautiful images. I mean, we'll get into it later on, but Cable 20, I mean, that's gorgeous art. Same with your run on Uncanny, and so much of your work, and you see it there, and you see that influence. So my question though, so you're reading that issue with Romita, and you're like, I want to do that. What was the next step? Do you remember who was the first character you drew? Like,
what, first Marvel character?
No, just like the first thing you ever drew. Like, you're like
Spider-Man, probably Spider-Man or Captain America or Captain Britain, and I would have been around 7 or 8. I would have thought. I remember, yeah. I mean, I drew stuff before that, but I think the earliest picture I've still got was from probably about 4. But that was just mostly scribble, basically. I mean, it didn't look like much. But no, I think it would have probably been Spider-Man, because that was the character that I was reading the most when I was little, I suppose.
So
I was always drawing something. Drawing something.
So in interviews, you've spoken about how when you were younger, Marvel really resonated with you, but as you've gotten older, you've had a deeper appreciation for DC. Yeah. And I'm just curious why that was. What's your perspective on that?
It's probably, I mean, it's not down to the characters. It was probably just down to availability. And like I was saying with the weekly comics and the reprints, Marvel had a much bigger presence in my neck of the woods over here than DC did. So I'd find the occasional DC comic, American DC comic, knocking around. But the majority of the time, it was the Marvel reprints. And so I just had a better appreciation of Marvel, really, when I was growing up in my formative years. Once I got a bit older and comics were easier to get hold of, I started to collect some of the DC stuff. I was always a big Superman fan. And I did manage to get a few Superman annuals when I was a kid from jumble sales and things. What else did I like? Teen Titans, Perez and Marv Wolfman on Teen Titans. I've still got pretty much a complete run of that collected over the years, which I bought at the time again, and of course when the X-Men crossed over with the Teen Titans, I was blown away. That Walt Simonson thing, I was just like, bloody hell, that's fantastic.
Darkseid, Dark Phoenix, Robin, Cyclops, like it was next level. I've read the issue throughout the years multiple times. I can never quite hold the plot in my head.
Doesn't matter. It looks great.
But it looks gorgeous, that cover.
All those characters interrelating with each other. It's just, that's fantastic.
We can never get something like that again today. It was something that was so unique to a specific era. Yeah. In other interviews, though, you've talked about how you were bullied at school, and comic books were sort of a gateway for you to help cope with that. Did the mutant metaphor with the X-Men ever really help you during that time?
To a certain degree, I suppose. I mean, when you get bullied, you have to find your own way through it. And, comics aren't really going to help. I think I could relate to some of the characters in comics, especially Spider-Man, Peter Parker, because from my perspective, I was getting bullied. I was still at school, and he was, in his earlier stories, obviously, high school and getting bullied by Flash Thompson. So I could relate to that. But I think, as far as bullying goes, you do have to find your own way through it. And I did. And while I wish it had never happened, at the same time, I wouldn't be the person I am today if it hadn't happened. So there's an upside to some aspects of bullying, It inspired me to take up martial arts. So I became a black belt in karate, and that wouldn't have happened if I hadn't been, in some sticky situations. So there's always positive that comes out of a negative. You just got to sort of like grit your teeth and push your way through, I think. But reading Spider-Man and the X-Men, it was a nice escape, even when you're not trying to relate to characters in the stories, it was a good way of just of escapism in general.
Have you watched No Way Home? Yeah.
Not yet.
Okay. Then you know what?
Don't spoil it.
No, I'm not gonna spoil it at all. Forget it. I was gonna ask you.
Go and see it, but over here there is still restrictions as far as the cinema goes, and you have to sit with one of those masks on all the way through. And it's a long movie, so I don't really fancy that. Once they relax the restrictions and I don't have to wear a mask all the way through the performance, then I'll go and see it.
How do you think the comic book industry has morphed with blockbusters like No Way Home and some of the other Marvel movies?
The comic book industry itself, I don't think it's a tough one. I think from the people that sort of like create the comics, we'd all love it if everybody that went to the cinema to see the movies would go and buy the comic book that related to that particular movie or franchise, but that just doesn't happen, unfortunately. I think obviously, the comic book industry has been slowly shrinking over the years, and I think that still is the case. And I think we all hoped that the success of the movies would bolster the comic book industry, but it doesn't seem to have happened. I think as far as comics go, with the success of some of the TV shows as well, I think comics are starting to be written more like their TV shows rather than the way they were in the old days, being written as comic books, which in some ways is good, in some ways is not so good. I preferred, probably because it's what I grew up with, I preferred the old way of writing a comic book. But some of the modern stuff I really quite like as well. So it's swings and roundabouts, really. It's what you personally prefer.
Yeah, it's so interesting because I think about when I was growing up and how reading comic books, you were kind of like a nerd, like that's what they always said. And now people know who Rocket Raccoon is.
Oh, totally. Yeah.
It's so mind-blowing because now everyone knows who these characters are.
That's a very good point. And it's kind of, that's the one thing that the big budget Marvel movies, DC movies have done is kind of get these characters into the public consciousness.
Yeah.
Because when I grew up, I was considered a nerd, very nerdy. And very geeky because I liked comics and because I liked superheroes, and it's far more acceptable these days. It's like geek chic now, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, it's so geek chic. Dude, but before they wouldn't let you sit at the table or like the lunch table because you were the nerdy kid. Now everyone wants you at the table so you can explain WandaVision to someone to explain what's going to happen with the X-Men and theories, and it is such a different landscape. And I can only imagine that, like, when Marvel was just a publisher, now they're owned by Disney, and then Warner Brothers owns DC. They have all of this like power behind it now, and the industry just feels so radically different. It's just insane. It's,
but even though there is a wider appreciation for the characters, the people that go to the movies and like those characters are still gravitating towards the movie versions, not towards the comic book versions. Do you know what I mean?
Very true.
So there may be a bigger fan base for Marvel characters, but it's for the movie versions of those characters rather than the comic books, which, is to be expected. But I think a lot of people in the comic industry just really wish that it would cross-pollinate a bit more. So we'd see some of the love,
I mean, preach on that. I agree. Speaking of the movies, favorite MCU film?
I loved the Captain America ones. I like all of those.
Oh my god!
I'm really
Winter Soldier's so great.
Winter Soldier was good. I actually liked the first one. I thought that was really good.
Oh yeah, that was great too.
That was a lot like the first Superman movie in tone.
Agreed.
But all of those Captain America ones I loved. I'm rather partial to the Doctor Strange one as well. I love the Doctor Strange movie and the Ant-Man one as well. I love Ant-Man. I like them all basically, but if I had to pick one, it would probably be either one of the Captain America ones or Doctor Strange.
Yeah. No, I mean, Doctor Strange, I mean, that's another one. Doctor Strange, a character who was, I mean, he's never been like D or C list, but he's definitely not been at the level he is right now in conversation. And obviously he's in No Way Home. And then we have Doctor Strange, 2 coming out. Yeah. And it's just, it warms my heart when like my buddies call me up and they're like, did you see Doctor Strange in this movie, in Endgame or Infinity War? And it's just like a whole new terrain with that. And it's exciting for the possibilities. I agree with exactly what you said about like, I wish some more of that love would translate into like the comic book properties themselves. But, it's an interesting time to be a fan. And what's also really interesting is that hopefully the X-Men will be coming into the MCU soon. So
fingers crossed. Yeah.
Fingers crossed on that.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to see how it does cross over into the MCU on screen, because the Fox movie's great. It was Fox, wasn't it? Yeah,
it was Fox.
Yeah, the Fox movies were great and of their time. So it'd be interesting to see Marvel's approach to it rather than going through the second party, so to speak. Straight from the horse's mouth.
Straight from the horse's mouth.
Yeah.
Is there a particular X character that you bonded with?
X-Men character.
Yeah.
What, from when I was reading it when I was a kid, or working on it, or when I was reading comics, the original team I used to like Cyclops.
Oh yeah.
Because I've always gravitated towards authoritative figures, I guess, as far as comics go. I like Captain America, I like Captain Britain, I like Cyclops, I like Reed Richards, I like the people that are in charge. So maybe I'm a bit of a control freak, I don't know.
There's nothing wrong with that. Nothing wrong with that.
No, but Cyclops in the original team and Wolverine in the new team, the newer team, the new X-Men. I always liked the Beast. Both incarnations, in the Hank McCoy sort of like big hands and human looking, and also the furry Beast. And I liked it when he became an Avenger. I've always liked the Beasts. At one point I really wanted to fly, and so Angel became my
favorite. You're describing what so many of us feel, which is like your favorite X-Men like changes daily, right? And it's all dependent on your mood. I will say though, notoriously in the Power of X-Men community, we hate Beast because we think Beast is a crazy sociopathic, self-obsessed lunatic who is doomed.
I'm talking about like earlier Beast, not
Earlier Beast, we love earlier Beast, except so we asked I've asked a couple of people who work on the books, and specifically Jordan D. White. No one can ever answer this question, so I will give you the courtesy. Where did he get his PhD from?
Well, there's a question.
So he's not really a doctor. He's not really a doctor. And so he's going around claiming of being a doctor, and it's all in good fun.
Isn't that why he was at the Academy for Gifted Youngsters in the first place? Surely Professor X has got some sort of credentials that he can bestow the PhD on the beast.
You know what? That is actually probably the best response I've gotten. You're right. He possibly does have credentials to be able to imbue beasts with that doctorate. Thank you for fixing this. That is a perfect answer.
Happy to help. That clears that up. Yeah.
That clears it up. That's done. We're boom. So thinking of the X-Men, but also I know that, you bonded with, so many more characters, but on Marvel side, is there like a specific look as an artist? Is there a specific look from a character that you would love to change, looking back on it, just with that editorial eye?
Pretty much most of the characters from the 90s, I would have said. There wasn't a good look going on most of the time in the 90s, I don't think. The thing that sticks out for me is Thor's crazy costume with the bare chest or the spikes sticking out of it, and all sorts of weird and wacky. Wonder Woman's costume in the 90s was dreadful, wasn't it? Like those. Some of them. She went through a phase when it went from the regular costume to like this funked up costume. Same with a lot of costumes back then.
I'm looking at that now. Yeah,
they were tweaking costumes just for the sake of it, rather than any particular real reason. Going back to the X-Men, I loved it when all of a sudden Wolverine showed up with a new costume, and Nightcrawler said something along, why the new threads? And he said, why not? And I thought that was just brilliant. No necessary explanations, no reasons why he had to change from the yellow and black to the brown and orange costume. He just fancied a change, and I quite like that. It was just so matter of fact. There's no big deal built up around it. I thought that was a nice approach as far as changing things.
When did you start entering comics in the 90s? When did you start working at Marvel? Do you remember the first issue?
It was the 90s. I'm part of the problem. I'm for part of the problem.
Hey, listen. In my eyes, and in so many of our eyes, you are not part of the problem. Your art is gorgeous. That goes without saying. We played it a little close to the chest that you were going to be on, and the people I told and got some questions from were so excited.
That's nice to know.
So you're not part of the problem, but I am curious.
I was definitely part of the 90s set. And, get the Cable 20 you were talking about.
Yeah.
I would have been probably 24, 25 when that came out, something like that.
Dude, so young. You're a baby.
I was a baby. And so that was very firmly in the 90s. Yeah. I think my first work was a backup strip in an X-Men annual with Scott Liddell. Yeah. And that was a Beast story, funnily enough. So I was really happy because it was Beast, and I liked the Beast. and that was my first paid job, and that was fantastic. And then I think I did. I think Deadpool came after that. Yeah.
You've made a very compelling case for Hank McCoy, by the way, today. Not many guests can, but he was your first paying gig, and you solved the riddle of his PhD. On the that wasn't, guys at home, I didn't even give him that question about Beast. I didn't even think we would talk about Beast today at all. And you literally came up with that on the spot. I mean, bravo.
I'll take it now.
So, part of the reason why I keep referring to Cable number 20 is that we are rereading Age of Apocalypse for the season of the podcast. And Cable number 20 is just, my God. I mean, I think for me, that's the end of Legion Quest. It's probably one of the best issues the X-Men have ever turned out. Like, a large part of that is because of your art. And I'm just curious, like, did you have a sense that it was going to be that big, that it was going to have this longevity and like be part of the perennial X stories? Like the second that Crystal is coming for them and the entire team. I have so many questions about how you did that issue.
I had no idea. I had no idea. I literally, I think I'd just finished Deadpool and I needed another assignment. And they asked me if I wanted to do it. And I said, yeah, I'd love to. I didn't know who would be writing it. You know, I wasn't overly familiar with Cable. And it just turned out that Jeff was writing it. I got this plot through. I think it's back in the days when they'd fax you the plot rather than rather than emails before email and stuff. Yeah, so the fax plot came through. I think they sent it via FedEx as well. And I thought, this is fantastic. This is a great story. Because I like character beats. I like character moments. I mean, I'm totally up for all the wham bam sort of like high octane fights and explosions and all that sort of stuff too. But I prefer quieter scenes where it explores, you know, motivations and things. And it's more challenging as well. Trying to draw people talking in from very different positions all the time without repeating yourself is a bit of a challenge. I quite enjoy that challenge. And there were a lot of moments like that through it. And it gave me a chance to stretch because, you know, I'd not been drawing comics for that long. I wasn't that good. I mean, looking back on it, I was competent enough to get work.
Sure. I'm sorry. This art is absolutely stunning. I mean,
I appreciate that you think that. For me, that's looking back at old work, and I feel that I'm a much better artist now than I was back then. So it looks a bit crude to me. Plus, I naturally draw in a more sort of like cartoony way. And when I first got into comics, it was suggested to me that if I drew more like Jim Lee and sort of like kind of hardened things up and sharpened edges off and stuff, I'd get more work, which worked out really well. And I was finding my way through that when I was drawing that. So that's how I look at it. You know, I don't look at it the same way you look at it. I look at it as a learning experience, and I was trying to learn on the job as I was going along. And I was just very lucky to be working with Jeff at the same time. And I remember really enjoying working on that. I remember drawing the page with Gambit sitting down, smoking his cigarette, and I remember drawing that page now like I was drawing it yesterday. Yeah,
right there.
That's the one. And with Rogue, yeah. I was thinking body language. I was thinking try and make it cinematic as possible within the confines of a comic book story and panel storytelling stuff. Which when we got to the kissing page, the double page spread of Cable and Domino, I just wanted to make that as different to every other kissing scene. Yeah, the proportions are all over the place, but that was the style back then, so I don't feel too bad about that. It served me well as well, but I wanted to make it as different to every other kissing scene that I'd seen before that. So I did spend a fair amount of time just, you know, sketching and resketching and to get that right, or as right as it could be within the amount of time that I had to draw it, because it was a very tight deadline. I got it very last minute, and I think I did a good job with that. I gave that to Jeff. He's still got it on his wall at home, because of that entire issue. That's 2 pages that he wanted, was the kissing one. So I said, yeah, absolutely. So and he's still got it on his wall at home now, as far as I know. And then after that, because it was initially just going to be the one issue of Cable. And then, as far as I understand it, they were trying, because Steve Gross was drawing up to them, I think, and he was going off to do X-Men, and they needed someone else to continue. And Jeff was prepared to carry on doing it. And he was talking to editorial, which I think was Lisa Patrick, if my memory serves properly. And he said, well, what about this kid, Ian? You know, he did a great job on 20. Would he be interested? So she contacted me and asked if I'd be interested in doing the ongoing. And I said, yeah, absolutely, no problem.
Of course.
I'd love to. You know, and especially as I'd only been in comics for a small amount of time, and any work is good work. And I just wanted to take whatever gigs they'd throw at me. So I took it with open arms, you know, and it was a way of learning on the job and on an ongoing basis and refining what I did. I mean, the deadlines were always really tight, but it was really good fun. When you're young, you just, you know, you've got so much
power
energy.
Through. Yeah.
You can power through is fantastic. And it was only then that I found out that Jeff used to write movies, you know, did Teen Wolf and Commando and stuff like that. And that blew me away as well. You know, that I was working with this chap that wrote all these adventure films that I'd seen, yeah, and stuff. So that was pretty cool. And I thoroughly had a great time on Cable. I really.
It shows in the art. I mean, you can tell you were having. I know you were learning, and you look back on it, and of course you've evolved. But reading it as just a reader growing up, like the issue was just so. Cable 20 was so profound. The rest of your Cable run, the issues you did were so powerful and epic and I'm curious so you're 25, 26 and you're coming into the X office during Age of Apocalypse where everything is getting like revamped. Did you know what was happening? Wait, no. Did they not loop you in? They didn't send you a FedEx with
the artist is always the last to know. It's always the writers that know that sort of thing. Yeah, no, I didn't know anything. I was very happy to be getting consistent work. Cable, that issue of Cable, I thoroughly enjoyed, as I did the ongoing series as well, and that went through a series of artistic changes within myself, you know, because like I said, I was still trying to find my way, and Joe Madureira suddenly became huge, and I started moving towards drawing more like him. So throughout my Cable run, it kind of veered. It started off looking a bit Jim Lee, and then it went kind of it was always me underneath, but you know, the finesse and finish was sort of, I kind of moved towards the prevailing trend at the time, let's say. I don't do that anymore, but it served me well.
No, I used to work in publishing. It's all about comps. You know, what can you be like? I'm sorry, but I cut you off.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And it was, you know, and sort of veering towards different art styles within my own art style as well. Kind of broadened my appreciation of different ways of doing things, you know, because, you know, I draw a certain way and I'm comfortable drawing a certain way. But when I'm trying to draw like another artist, even though it's my underlying drawing, it's a challenge because it's not natural to how you do it yourself, and so you'll pick up things that you hadn't considered and incorporate it into your own style, which is a good way of learning, I think, sometimes.
Was there ever any talk about you doing one of the Age of Apocalypse titles? Because I know you eventually do Chronicles, but in the interim, were you?
No, they never did. I got the Chronicles one, which was with Howard Mackie, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And to be frank, I don't even remember the fact that it was Howard. All I remember is them saying, you know, Marvel, do you want to draw it? And I said yes, because, you know, I wanted to work. And I took it on, and it was, you know, a pleasurable experience. I made sure I had a lot of reference. I liked those reinterpretations of the characters, but it was only, you know, flash forward 15, 20 years, when I was working with Howard on Ravagers at DC, that he said, well, you know, we've worked together before. I said, have we? Yeah, X-Men Chronicles. Oh, that was you.
Yeah.
And I had no idea. You know, I back then I would just take the plot. I'd barely look at who wrote it, and I just, you know, the deadlines were tight, especially during the Age of Apocalypse. So I just grabbed the plot and power through. Yeah, when I started doing Ravages with Howard, he was like, yeah, we've worked together before. Dude, that was awesome. I was like, you know, that was great.
That particular issue of Chronicles is gorgeous. I mean, it is. I mean,
I feel like the first page with Wolverine with his one hand and the side-on profile. I did like drawing that page. I remember that distinctly.
And the group shot, and that was a mammoth 44-page. Do you remember how tight was your deadline for that?
Pretty tight. They always were, and they still are. You know, I haven't worked at Marvel for must be 10, 12 years, something, probably a bit more than that now. But they were always very, very tight deadlines especially in the 90s. They were always on very tight deadlines when I was working on them. And you never really had much time to plan anything. It was literally grab the plot, make sure you had the reference. And back in those days, it was physical reference. You couldn't just jump on the internet and grab whatever you wanted to look at. You know, it was a case of you either had the comics in your collection or they sent complimentary issues to you so that you had all the reference, or they faxed stuff or what have you. And then you just get cracking because you didn't have time to plan things out, generally speaking.
It's so different. In thinking about how you guys were working in the 90s, because we were talking to Chris Sims, and he was saying that, you know, when he's giving direction to an artist, he'll say something like, and here we're going to homage the Star Wars fight, you know, and because of the internet, you just Google that Star Wars fight, and then, you know, the artist is able to sort of render that on page. But
or they'll send you a link to it.
You got the link there.
You don't have to do anything. Yeah.
But in the 90s, you did not have that. There was nothing like that.
It's changed completely. I used to have to go down to the public library and find magazines which had stuff, you know, that I needed to draw, photocopy it on the photocopier there, and then bring it home with me. Or go to a bookstore and buy a book that had a particular image in it that I needed for reference, and then bring it home with me. You know, it was literally like that. And I mean, this is back in the days when you couldn't even take a photograph and put it on your computer. I mean, it was you took a photograph back then, you had to send it off to get it developed and stuff. It wasn't like instant photos and like it is today.
It's so, the way we communicate and the way work is done is so different. It's just I look at Age of Apocalypse and I think, what a great run. I look at your issues, I look at your Uncanny run, and I'm like, this is just such wonderful, like, peak of what I think is good comic books. And to think it was done probably in a time where everything was so much more, or so much harder to communicate and execute. And it really is wonderful. I mean, I even think that also, like, when I'm trying to find a place, I was like, how before I had my phone to guide me somewhere, how did I ever find where I needed to go, especially like in New York City, which is where I live now.
Yeah, totally.
All right, so you also came in during the Morrison era, and that was a radical revolution for the X books.
Yeah.
What was the vibe like? So you were there for Age of Apocalypse, and now you're here for Morrison, and they were doing something so different. What was the vibe like in the X office?
Well, it's a tough one. I never spent much time at the X office because I live over here in the UK, and I'd been over to the New York offices once before when I was initially breaking in.
Only once before?
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I got my first gig, which was the Beast story.
Mhm.
And then I didn't get much work after that. So I went to New York and I did some more sample pages. And I had a batch of sample pages for Marvel and a batch for DC. And I was going to go to Marvel first. And if I struck out at Marvel, I'd go over the street and try my luck at DC. That's how I had it in my head. Anyway, I got to Marvel and I didn't have an appointment. Didn't even think about stuff like that. So I just went up to the front desk and said, is there any chance I could come up and see XYZ editor? I knew a couple. So as luck would have it, they let me go up. And I was just hanging out up there. And the reason I got Deadpool was because I was just hanging around the office and I was in Suzanne Gaffney's office and she had a bunch of stuff knocking around her office, and there was some pages on the side by Carlos Pacheco from a Bishop limited series.
Oh, God.
And I was looking at those and I was thinking, bloody hell, that's much better than me. I'm never going to get anywhere. And then she said, well, we've got this Deadpool thing that needs drawings. You want to do that? And I said, yeah, love to. You know. So that's how I got the work on Deadpool. And that's the first time at Marvel offices. And then the second time was, as you said, when Grant came on board for the X-Men. By that time, Joe Quesada had taken over as well. And as I recall, how did it go? I got a phone call from Mark Powers, who was one of the editors at the time on the X-Men, and he asked me if I'd be interested in taking over Uncanny. And I said, yes, love to. And the next thing I knew, it was all being sort of revamped, and it was going to be Grant and Frank on New X-Men, and me and Joe on Uncanny X-Men. That was it. And what happened after that? So I accepted the gig, and then I was asked to redesign the characters as I saw them for the Uncanny, and which I did, and I did it in a very sort of like traditional way, so to speak. It was still spandex and stuff like that, you know. I think I really did Wolverine in more of a sort of a biker outfit, leather biker outfit, more like the movies.
Yeah.
But the rest of them were all, I think, still spandex. Anyway. So I did those, and they were just scribbled down in colour on bits of layout pad and stuff. And then they flew us to New York. So there was me, Joe, Grant, and Frank, and we all ended up in the Marvel offices. It's the first time I met Joe Quesada as well. So I shook hands, you know, and we all said hello to each other and all met each other. And then I'd never met Joe before, but obviously Grant and Frank had worked together beforehand and knew each other quite well because they're both Scottish up in Scotland. I remember Frank getting his folio out, and he pulled out all these redesigns for the X-Men, and they were like nothing I've ever seen before.
Yeah.
And I was like, well, nobody told me we were allowed to do that. You know, I'd gone this traditional route, and he had obviously spoken with Grant about what Grant wanted and what, you know, and it had been obviously a joint collaboration. But he pulled out these things, and they all looked totally different. They had like, they were as you saw them in the comic book, you know, the leather outfits and Wolverine with his dog tags and all that sort of stuff. But when in Frank's original layouts and visuals that he did for the costumes, it was all day glow yellow. It wasn't like the yellow that you get in comics. It's like the fluorescent yellow that you get like construction workers wear for visibility, high visibility.
Yeah.
So it was black leather with high vis, giant X's across and stuff, and I thought, I remember just being blown away because I'd never seen Frank's stuff before, and I thought, bloody hell, that's amazing.
That's gorgeous. Yeah, it's next level.
And so, you know, it was kind of a case of, well, that's obviously the way we're going to go, because that's just terrific. So from then I had to redesign my characters in that vein, but obviously put my own slant on it slightly, but channel them more towards what Frank and Grant had come up with. And then so still in New York, and then we went down the street. Oh yeah.
I mean, I just looking at them here, I mean, they're just, I mean, look at that.
I took Bobby Drake in a more of a boy band sort of direction.
He definitely was boy band.
It was kind of Backstreet Boys meets Bobby Drake, wasn't it?
Same with Chamber there, by the way.
I think it was really tricky to draw. You know, he was a challenge, Chamber. But I remember after the meeting, me, Grant, Frank, and Joe, we all went to a bar just around the corner from Marvel offices, and had something to eat, a few drinks and stuff, and just chatting about it all. Just coming up with ideas and stuff. And Joe came up with the idea for the kissing cover.
Well, you know that. So I'm a diehard Jean Grey fan. I love Jean.
Okay.
That cover, oh my God. So it originated with Joe, but like the way you and by the way, in talking to you today and understanding the emphasis you put on body language, I mean, it's always been there in your art. And I think that's what subconsciously has always drawn me to your art, has been like that body language. But like that kiss, it's so hot. It's so passionate. You feel the vibe with those characters because of how they're positioned there.
Well, some of that's down to Joe as well, because, you know, like I said before, when I do a kissing scene, I try and make it as different to the previous one that I've drawn or any others that I've seen as far as I can. And we were in this bar, and Joe grabbed a napkin and he just did a little stickman doodle and said, "This would be a great cover." He said, "This will drive the fans nuts if you draw this." And I said, "Okay, fair enough." So as soon as I got back to the UK, I just did a few sketches and pretty much drew that straight out as you saw it, as it was printed.
What was the reaction from anyone at that time?
At the time, didn't get the feedback that you get now on social media and stuff. So as far as I knew, everybody liked it, and that was that. So I didn't get sort of like great job there or anything. You know, it was that's my Stanley. No, it was none of that. It was just a case of I'd done the job, everybody was happy with it, move on. It was, you know, that tends to be the way it's been throughout, you know, my working life in comics.
Well, Uncanny X-Men 394, guys at home. That's a cover we're talking about. It's where Logan and Jean are kissing, and it kicks off the Uncanny run during the Morrison era. Was it your idea to shave Angel's head as well?
Yes, it was my idea to give him like a little tiny beard and shave his head. I just wanted him to look a bit more distinctive, and his outfit, his costume, was based on a skydiving flight suit, jumpsuit.
Oh, that's interesting.
Which is why he's got those sort of like things that come around the arm at the top, and it's when you're in formation, it gives you something to hold on to when you're skydiving. I figured that's appropriate, you know, seeing as he's in the sky all the time. And if there's an incident in a story when the X-Men are falling out of a plane and he swoops in to get them, it's something for them to all hold on to, and he can, you know, it was thinking, whenever I design costumes and stuff, I try and think of the practical applications of them. You know, when I did that X-Men annual, didn't I, with Kitty and Caliban. And at the time, Kitty's costume had these like metal bars that went round her shoulders or something like that.
Yeah.
It was just a design element. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if she could hit a button or something, it would flick out and she could use it as a weapon or something like that. And that was just something, because as I recall, it was just like, there's this fight sequence and Kitty ducks and does this or whatever. And I seem to remember trying to make her costume a bit more practical, even though it hadn't initially been designed that way.
Yeah, I'm looking at the photos here now, and you totally were able to encapsulate that. And I love what you were saying though about the fine details you're putting in for the characters. One of my questions was going to be, how is your approach to drawing the X-Men different than other characters? And hearing you talk about the uniform aspect of it is super interesting.
Well, my approach to drawing the X-Men is no different to how I draw any other superheroes, really. But I always do have the back of my head the way the costumes formed. I liked it when artists started drawing seams and things on costumes. John Byrne was one of the first that I remember that used to put seams down the side of gloves and things, and it gave me an appreciation of how this would actually be made if it was in real life. I mean, yes, it's stretchy spandex, but you could kind of get your head around how it actually works. It was the same with Wolverine's mask. He had, or helmet, as I like to call it, because there was an issue where he takes his mask off and it doesn't fall apart like a mask. It's like he takes it off like a helmet and and puts it on the side. He had the brown and orange costume at the time. I think it was during an Alpha Flight crossover or something like that. And it might have been the Wendigo thing. Oh, maybe it was a Wendigo. I can't remember. Anyway, took the helmet off and put it down. And I thought that was a neat touch. And the same with Alan Davis's redesign of Captain Britain. Alan Davis is the only one that can draw the mask right, because it's not a mask, it's a helmet. And when Alan does it, he takes the frontispiece off, and there's a bit of fabric that comes up the back of Brian Braddock's head, but the mask clips on, and it's got like a squared off kind of shape to it, with the chin bit as well, and it just clicks on, and it's like a proper helmet. And pretty much every artist I've seen other than Alan that draws Captain Britain in his redesigned Alan Davis costume just gets it wrong. They draw it like it's a fabric mask rather than a helmet, or like it's got its own integral shape to it, rather than forming to the contours of the face. So he obviously thinks about stuff like that, and I've always got that in the back of my head. I've got to have some reason why the costume does this or does that, or why it's there in the first place, which is, like I say, with Archangel's grabby bits on the side of his uniform. Same with Nightcrawler. Nightcrawler at the time was a priest, so I just reflected that in the design.
That is my favorite costume for Nightcrawler.
Thank you.
I have to tell you. And I loved it so much. And it's one of the reasons why I also gravitated towards those issues as well, because it just made sense. And it was it's a nuance of the character that is so personal, and it just works so well.
I loved
and that was your idea, right? Yeah.
Putting a little collar on that costume. That whole costume design was mine. Yeah. I liked the contradiction of Nightcrawler, in so much that he was totally overly religious, but looked like a demon. I thought that was a great, what's the word I'm looking for? Help me out.
He
contrast. A great contrast. It's not what you'd expect. And I thought that was a great play on the whole Nightcrawler as a character type thing.
What was it like working with Joe
Casey?
Yeah, Joe Casey.
We got.
Sorry, we have so many Joes here. Joe Quesada, Joe Casey. Joe you want to talk about?
That's the guy named Joe. That was great. I like Joe a lot. We get on very well, personally as well as professionally. I've worked with him a few times. Nothing but good times on the X-Men. I was signed on Well, it's funny. Okay. When I first took the gig, I was under the impression that Joe's and mine Uncanny X-Men was going to be more down the traditional route of the X-Men, the way it had been going on, and that Grant and Frank's would have been like the more experimental, edgy X-Men title. Because there were only two at the time, weren't there? There were only two.
Yeah, there was only two. Well, a third with Extreme as well.
Right. Okay. So that's how I thought it was going to play out. But going down the line, the tone of the Uncanny wasn't gelling with me.
I got you.
It was getting a bit too dark for me, and I wasn't enjoying it as much. There's no disrespect to Joe. I mean, he was writing the story he wanted to tell. I prefer a lighter touch to the story.
Well, you like the bright. I mean, what initially drew you were the bright costumes and the colors, and now you're doing the complete opposite of that.
Yeah, and it was a double-edged sword for me, because it was a dream come true. I was working on the X-Men, but I wasn't enjoying it as much as I wanted to. So I thought it was best if I just step aside and let someone else take over. Really, that it was nothing more than that. I just preferred a lighter touch.
Those issues you did so well. I was looking to see if I had it here. I mean, they anthologized it in its own trade paperback, the Poptopia, which just had your issues in it, period.
Yeah. Which was nice. That's always a good thing. And I seem to remember Joe and I creating a character, Stacy or Stacy X or something.
Oh yeah, Stacy X,
which I never got to draw. I designed her, but I bowed out just before Stacy X debuted in the book.
And thinking about how dark and gritty and different the X-Men were, Stacy X is sort of emblematic of that. I believe she appeared recently in Cy Spurrier's Way of X. Okay. And she's changed a little bit. But I was going to ask you about Stacy X, funny enough, but when I was doing the research for our interview, I saw that she came afterwards, and I thought, oh, you probably didn't have a hand in creating her, but you did.
Yeah, I drew the original sketches and look of her and stuff. I've still got them somewhere.
Yeah. I mean, talking about mutants that pop on the page, I mean, she certainly pops.
Yeah. But I think she was changed slightly from my original design when she came to print. Yeah, that's it. I mean, I can't believe that's 22 years ago.
That's insane, man. And thinking about how different the X-Men are now, what are your thoughts on the Krakoan age? I
haven't read any of it. Yeah. I'll be honest. I don't read a lot of X-Men titles anymore, or comics in general. I'd started to just recently read a few more than I usually do, but it's just getting the time, really.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot out there right now.
Well, that's true. There is a whole lot of different titles that, back in the old days, you could sort of like pretty much pick them all up. But now there's so many to choose from. It's tough.
Yeah, it was when we were talking to Jordan D.Y., who's the current editor for the X books. He talked about, I think they have an insane amount of titles right now, and he was like, we don't design every book for every kind of reader. It's okay not to like this book. You can read that book, et cetera, et cetera. And it's very true. I mean, I have an X-Men podcast, and even I cannot keep up with all of that on a monthly basis with time and everything. It's just a very different approach. Whereas in the past, you just had Uncanny and New X-Men. And then you had like Exiles or Extreme if you wanted to go in deeper. But your main stories were these two right here.
Yeah. And occasionally they cross over. But
it's fun.
It was easier to follow. But, it's great that there is that amount of variation these days as well. Also, so there's something for everyone. You can. There's always something that'll appeal to someone.
So we have a few listener questions. As I said, I was so excited that we were going to speak, and I asked some few folks questions, and they I'm just pulling them up right now, and they were just so excited. I thank you so much for taking the time and answering all of these very
My
meticulous
pleasure.
questions about it. It's funny. I forgot who I was talking to. Oh, I'm trying to remember, but they had. Oh, it may have been Zeb Wells. Oh gosh, I don't remember, but they were like, I'm trying, they're remembering something that they did 20 years ago. And if you ask me what I did 20 years ago, I can't even remember what I did last night, you
Uh,
know? And
I've got a really dreadful memory, but stuff that long ago, some of it really sticks in my head. And like I was saying, you know, when I'm drawing and I'm happy or relatively happy with the result of that day's drawing, it does kind of stick in my head. So, you know, that Gambit page, for instance, in Cable 20 that we were talking about earlier,
Mhm.
that I remember like I drew it yesterday, but like you said, I can't remember what I had for lunch yesterday.
Well, you had an amazing detail, and I am fanboying out at the idea of you, Grant, Frank, and Joe, and other Joe Casada, Papa Joe Casada, in the
Mm.
same room brainstorming and talking about what would become the Morrison era, the new X-Men era, and how that radicalized the book. So that to me it's just incredible. Our first listener question is,
Yeah,
which X character was the most challenging to draw?
chamber,
Chamber. That's right. You did say that. You did say
chamber.
that. Is it because of the anatomy of his
Yeah,
mutation?
I mean, you still have to draw the underlying shape of him underneath, but it's
Mhm.
getting all that glowing energy right and making it look
Mhm.
good, you know, because there's so many different people draw the energy in different ways. And I eventually settled on that sort of like jaggedy sort of like ball effect because I'd not seen anyone really. Yeah, I think Chris Pacello originally drew him, didn't he?
Yep. Yep. He
And
originated in Generation X.
I based my version of him kind of similar to Chris's. Some people draw it like a zigzaggy thing that comes out, and
Mhm.
it's just so open to interpretation. And I wanted it to look, you know, consistent. So I was trying to kind of come up with a way of keeping it contained, but obviously making it look like the energy was sort of expanding and contracting at the same time. So that was a bit of a challenge.
It's very fluid, and I think he is. I mean, I think that era was probably the last time he had a very significant story in the books. Folks at home, do not quote me on that, but the last time I remember a really great chamber spotlight. Not that he hasn't had stories, but the great spotlight was that era. And a large part, again, is the art you did with him and how fluid the energy looked. And it looked it was very captivating.
Thank you very much. You know, I mean, it was fun drawing chamber, but I get asked a fair amount at conventions for commissions of chamber.
Oh,
Well, funnily enough, more than I ever thought I would.
wait. Yeah, Chamber has a huge fan base, and we love him here. When you were talking about your Kitty Uncanny X-Men annual, I think it was 16 or 17. I did a quick Google search, and a character who was there, Beast. You drew him so wonderful in some of those shots. But also, when you were talking about X-Men Unlimited 10, I believe that's the one where it's right before Onslaught, and the real Beast is put into like a wall by Dark Beast.
Dark Beast, yeah.
By Dark Beast. And I just want to
With all
thank
the
you.
dreadlocks and stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So thank you for drawing Hank McCoy being imprisoned by his much superior doppelganger, Dark Beast. So you just like nailed the Beast thing today.
Well, I did a Beast cover as well, didn't I?
Yeah.
For one of the X-Men issues, Dark Beast versus Regular Beast, and it was on a white background, I think.
Yeah. It's so nice.
That was great. I enjoyed doing that. And I've had to redraw that a couple of times for private commissions and things.
Our next question is: was there ever an X-Men or a Marvel pitch that you were a part of or did, and it just never went through?
No. Back in the old days when I was working on the X-Men, I wasn't in that sort of position. You know, I was just a penciler that drew the stories. No, I never did any sort of pitching. I've had a few rejected at DC, but no, not at Marvel. There's one, like I was saying earlier, I do like Captain Britain, and I've got an idea for a limited series at Marvel involving Captain Britain, but I haven't pitched it to them yet. It's just something that occurred to me recently.
Well,
I'd like to do.
Here's the follow-up question then, because obviously Captain Britain is a big part of the X-Men lore with Betsy. When our other listener question is, when will we see you on the X books again?
Well, never say never. I certainly wouldn't rule it out, but I think they've got everyone they need at the moment. If they asked me to, I'd certainly entertain the idea.
A Captain Britain mini sounds really good about now.
Well, I like the idea of not out of continuity, but not in the current continuity. As there was, I don't know if you've read the Captain Britain collections that Marvel have put out at all.
I did not. I have not had a chance to.
Okay.
Our co-host, who's not here today, is a big fan of them. But
originally there was stories by Chris Claremont and Herb Trimpe, Trimp, however you pronounce his surname, and then Captain Britain went through a few changes, and then there was original stories drawn and written over here in the Hulk Weekly, and they're in black and white, and they've been reprinted in some of the Marvel omnibuses and stuff. And those stories supposedly take place after Captain Britain's team up with Spider-Man against Arcade in Murder World. So there is a gap between the end of that story and the beginning of the Black Knight, black and white Captain Britain Black Knight team up in the Hulk Weekly. And I think there's like a mini series worth of stories that could be done to bridge that gap. And I think that would be pretty damn fun to work on. That's what I'd like to do.
That seems like such a wonderful way to end our chat today. Wait, what projects are you working on now that you can plug? And where can fans connect with you?
Oh, crikey. How can they connect with me? I've got a Facebook page.
Yes.
I've got a website for art sales. And it's ianchurchillart.com, I think it is. Ian Churchill, I think so. Facebook, well, and that's easy enough to look me up. The picture of me is kind of like so if you see one that looks like me going, that's probably the right one. There are a few others that I've had before that I've got locked out of, or I couldn't remember the password or whatever. So
you're preaching to the choir on not remembering any passwords.
So the one you need is the one of me just going, so kind of frowning a bit. What am I working on? I've got an Action Comics annual that I'm working on at the moment. Yes. I've just done an Action Comics cover. I've been doing lots of covers for Richard Starkings and the Elephant Men just recently. I work on Marine Man every time I get a free moment, my own creator, own character. What else do I do? What am I doing? I've been talking to Jonathan Ross about doing another project with him. So I've got plenty of
you have a lot coming down the pipeline.
irons in the fire, yeah.
Oh, we love that. Thank you so much for your time today.
You're welcome. No problem at all.